You know what I think, Bryce? I think she stole that suit too. Probably walked right out of Nordstrom with it.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Check the tags. Bet they're still on.
Look at her, stone quiet. That's the guilty look right there.
At 5:47 a.m., inside Reagan National Airport, the terminal was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the polished floors. A few early travelers shuffled toward security, coffee cups in hand, eyes still heavy with sleep. The checkpoint machines beeped in a steady rhythm. Nothing about the morning suggested anything unusual was about to happen. A black woman in her early 50s walked through the terminal with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of commanding courtrooms. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, perfectly pressed. Her carry-on rolled behind her in a smooth, practiced motion. Her posture was straight, her pace unhurried. She had done this walk 1,000 times. This was Judge Vivian Hartwell, a federal appeals court judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, appointed by the President of the United States 3 years earlier after a unanimous Senate confirmation. She had spent 18 years as a federal prosecutor before that, trying cases that put cartel leaders and corrupt politicians behind bars. She was traveling to Chicago for the National Judicial Conference, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on civil rights and judicial integrity. Her credentials were impeccable. Her reputation was spotless. She had dedicated her life to the law, to the belief that justice applied equally to everyone, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. But in the next 12 minutes, none of that would matter to the two officers who were already watching her from across the terminal. What they didn't realize was that their body cameras were recording. Every word, every action, everything that was about to happen would be captured in high-definition video that would eventually reach the White House. Officer Bryce Kessler stood near the security checkpoint with his arms crossed, scanning the terminal the way a predator watches a watering hole. He was 44 years old, stocky, with a shaved head and a permanent scowl etched into his face. 16 years with the Reagan National Airport Police Department had taught him one thing: he could do whatever he wanted as long as he used the right words in his reports. His record should have ended his career years ago. 31 complaints over 14 years, racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation, harassment. Every single complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs and dismissed. Witnesses recanted. Victims stopped returning calls. Supervisors wrote phrases like unsubstantiated and insufficient evidence and filed the paperwork away where it would never see daylight. Kessler had learned the system. He knew that as long as he claimed someone was evasive or matched a description or exhibited suspicious behavior, no one would question him. His colleagues called him old school. Some of the younger officers admired him. Others quietly requested transfers after working a few shifts by his side. His partner that morning was Officer Danny Stokes, 29 years old, 5 years on the job. Stokes was tall and lean, with the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself. He laughed at Kessler's jokes, nodded at his opinions, and never once questioned his calls. When Kessler moved, Stokes followed. When Kessler spoke, Stokes agreed. Kessler's eyes locked onto a figure moving through the terminal, a black woman in an expensive suit, walking like she owned the place. Something about her bothered him. The confidence, the posture, the way she didn't look down when she passed. He nudged Stokes with his elbow. "Watch this one." Judge Hartwell had already cleared security and was walking toward Gate 23 when she heard the voice behind her. "Ma'am, stop right there." She stopped. She turned slowly, her carry-on coming to rest beside her. 2 airport police officers were approaching, one older with a shaved head, the other younger and trailing slightly behind. The older one had his hand resting on his duty belt, fingers inches from his weapon. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, the same tone she used when attorneys in her courtroom tried to grandstand. Kessler stepped closer than necessary. His eyes moved over her suit, her jewelry, her confident posture. Something about her irritated him in a way he couldn't articulate. A black woman moving through his terminal like she had every right to be there, dressed like she was somebody important, looking him in the eye like they were equals. You fit a description, he said. We had a theft reported earlier this morning, someone matching your appearance. Hartwell's expression didn't change. I'm a federal judge with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm traveling to Chicago on official judicial business. I've been through security and I'm heading to my gate. Kessler's lips curled into a smirk, the kind of smirk that said he had heard every excuse, every lie, every desperate attempt to talk out of trouble. Sure you are. Stokes shifted his weight behind his partner, positioning himself to block her path forward. A businessman nearby slowed his pace, watching. A young woman at a coffee kiosk looked up from her phone. Kessler's body camera blinked red on his chest, recording everything. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. I'm going to need to see some identification. Kessler's voice carried the flat authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. Judge Hartwell took a slow breath. She had handled hostile witnesses, violent defendants, attorneys who screamed objections across her courtroom. She knew how to stay calm when others wanted her to break. I'm going to reach into my bag for my credentials, she said clearly. I'm moving slowly so there's no misunderstanding. She unzipped the front pocket of her carry-on and retrieved a leather folder. Inside was her federal judicial identification card issued by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, her state bar card from when she practiced law, her official travel itinerary showing the conference in Chicago and her role as keynote speaker. She handed them to Kessler. He looked at the judicial ID for less than 3 seconds. He flipped the bar card over like it was a grocery store receipt. He didn't bother reading the itinerary. These could be fake, he said, tossing the folder back toward her. It hit her chest and fell to the floor. Anyone can print stuff like this. Doesn't prove anything. Stokes nodded. We see fake IDs all the time. Hartwell bent down slowly and picked up her credentials. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Officer, I am a sitting federal appeals court judge appointed by the President of the United States. You can verify my identity with one phone call to the U.S. Marshal's Service or the Fourth Circuit Clerk's office. Kessler stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. I'll verify what I want to verify, he said. Now turn around. Kessler didn't step back. He stepped forward. He was close enough now that Judge Hartwell could see the veins in his neck, the flush of anger creeping up from his collar. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. The mask of professional detachment was slipping, revealing something uglier underneath. People like you, he said, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. Think a fancy suit means you're above the law. Think you can walk through here like you own the place, like the rules don't apply to you. Hartwell met his eyes without flinching. I'd like your badge number, officer, and the name of your supervisor. Kessler didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge the request. His hand moved to his cuffs. Stokes shifted to the right, closing off any path she might have taken to walk away. His hand hovered near his belt. His eyes darted between Hartwell and the growing number of travelers who had stopped to watch. A white businessman in a navy blazer stood frozen near the window, his rolling bag forgotten beside him. A young woman in her 20s had her phone raised, camera pointed directly at the confrontation. A mother pulled her child closer and backed away slowly. Kessler noticed the phone. Put that away, he barked at the young woman. This is official police business. You're interfering with an investigation. The woman hesitated but didn't lower her phone. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept recording. Kessler turned back to Hartwell. His jaw was tight. His patience was gone. Whatever restraint he had maintained was evaporating in real time, captured frame by frame on body cameras and civilian phones that would soon be seen by millions. Last chance, he said. Turn around. Now. Judge Hartwell spoke slowly and clearly, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. But I am also telling you, officer, that you are making a serious mistake. I am a federal judge. This will not end the way you think it will. Something in Kessler's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, his nostrils flared. It was the look of a man who had never been challenged by someone he considered beneath him and who refused to tolerate it now. He grabbed her right arm and wrenched it behind her back. The motion was violent, sudden, and completely unnecessary. Before she could react, His other hand slammed into her upper back, driving her forward and down. Judge Vivian Hartwell hit the terminal floor face first. The sound was sickening, a dull crack followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. Her glasses flew from her face and skidded across the tile, one lens shattering into pieces. Her carry-on tipped over. Her briefcase burst open, scattering legal documents and a garment bag containing her judicial robe across the polished floor. Stokes dropped immediately, driving his knee into the center of her back. "Stop resisting," he shouted. "Stop resisting," Kessler echoed, pinning her wrists together behind her. She was not resisting. She was 52 years old. She weighed 140 pounds. She lay completely still, her cheek pressed against the cold tile, blood beginning to trickle from a gash above her eyebrow where her face had struck the ground. 6 civilian phones recorded every second. 2 body cameras captured every angle. The red lights blinked silently, preserving what would become the most damning footage of police brutality the country had seen in years. For a moment, the terminal was silent. Then the reactions came all at once. The white businessman in the navy blazer stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief. "That's a federal judge," he shouted, pointing at the scattered credentials on the floor. "What the hell are you doing? She showed you her ID." A black woman standing near the coffee kiosk had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She shook her head slowly, unable to speak, watching a nightmare unfold in real time. An elderly man in a worn Navy veteran's cap pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. His voice was hoarse but steady. "You're assaulting her. She didn't do anything. I watched the whole thing. She was cooperating." Kessler's head snapped toward him. "Sir, back off. Now. This is a police matter. Everyone needs to clear the area." No one moved. Stokes pulled Hartwell's wrists together and snapped the handcuffs into place. The metal clicked with a cold finality. She lay motionless on the tile, blood pooling slowly beneath the gash above her eyebrow. Her charcoal suit was torn at the shoulder. Her judicial robe spilled out of its garment bag like evidence at a crime scene. She said nothing. Not a word of protest. Not a cry of pain. Not a single plea for help. Years of training had taught her this moment. As a prosecutor, she had prepared witnesses for hostile cross-examinations. As a judge, she had watched defendants destroy their own cases by talking too much. She knew that everything happening right now was being recorded. The body cameras, the phones, the witnesses who would later testify. Her silence was her weapon, and it would prove more devastating than anything she could have said. Lieutenant Cheryl Davenport heard the commotion on her radio before she saw it. Dispatch had called it a disturbance near Gate 23. But the voices crackling through the channel told a different story. Shouting, angry witnesses, something about excessive force. She moved quickly through the terminal, her hand resting on her radio, her instincts telling her this was about to become a very long day. She arrived in under 4 minutes. The scene stopped her cold. A black woman lay on the ground in handcuffs, her face bloodied, her suit torn, surrounded by scattered documents and a garment bag. A crowd of angry travelers stood in a semicircle, phones raised, voices overlapping with accusations and demands. Kessler stood over the woman with his arms crossed, his jaw set in defiance. Stokes hovered nearby, looking nervous for the first time. "What happened here?" Davenport demanded. Kessler answered without hesitation. "Suspicious individual. She was evasive during questioning, became verbally aggressive, and refused to comply with lawful commands. She resisted when I attempted to detain her." Davenport looked at the woman on the ground, then at the crowd, then at the documents scattered across the tile. A leather folder lay open near her foot. She bent down and picked it up. Inside was a federal judicial identification card. The photo matched the bloodied face on the floor. The name read, Vivian Hartwell. The title read, United States Circuit Judge, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. Davenport's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks so completely that Stokes took a step back. "Bryce," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you know who this is?" Kessler blinked. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but the faintest shadow of doubt. It was already far too late. Lieutenant Davenport stepped away from the scene, her hand trembling as she raised her radio. She switched to a private channel and called Captain William Driscoll, the commanding officer on duty. "Captain, we have a situation at Gate 23. A federal judge has been detained and injured by 2 of our officers. I need you here now." Driscoll arrived in 3 minutes. One look at the scene and he was on his phone. His first call went to the airport authority director. The director listened for less than 30 seconds before interrupting. "A federal judge? Are you absolutely certain?" He was calling the Department of Justice liaison before Driscoll finished answering. The DOJ liaison, a career attorney who had handled sensitive cases for 15 years, made one call of his own. It went directly to the White House counsel's office. 12 minutes. That was all it took. 12 minutes from the moment Judge Vivian Hartwell's face hit the terminal floor to the moment the White House learned that a sitting federal appeals court judge, appointed by the president himself, had been slammed to the ground and handcuffed by airport police while traveling on official business. The president was briefed within the hour. By mid-morning, the DOJ Civil Rights Division had been activated. FBI agents were dispatched to Reagan National to secure all evidence. Federal marshals arrived to ensure Judge Hartwell received immediate medical attention and protection. The airport police department was ordered to preserve all body camera footage, radio transmissions, and incident reports. Kessler and Stokes were separated and placed in different rooms. Their badges were confiscated, their weapons were taken. This was no longer a local matter. This was no longer an internal affairs review. This was a federal case, and it was moving faster than anyone at Reagan National had ever seen. The FBI evidence team pulled the body camera footage within 2 hours of the incident. Kessler's camera had recorded everything from the moment he first spotted Judge Hartwell walking through the terminal. Stokes's camera captured the secondary angles, the positioning, the moments his partner's camera missed. Together, they provided a complete, uninterrupted record of the entire encounter. Federal prosecutors gathered in a secure conference room at the DOJ building to review the footage. No one spoke as it played. They watched Hartwell stop when commanded. They watched her calmly identify herself as a federal judge. They watched her slowly retrieve her credentials, announce every movement, and hand over documents that clearly established who she was. They watched Kessler glance at her federal judicial ID for less than 3 seconds before throwing it back at her chest. They heard him say, "People like you think a fancy suit means you're above the law." They watched him step closer, watched her request his badge number, watched him ignore her completely. And then they heard him say, just before he grabbed her arm, "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You don't talk to me like that." The slam was brutal. The sound of her face hitting the tile made one of the junior attorneys look away. The image of Stokes driving his knee into her back while shouting, "Stop resisting," at a motionless 5-2, year-old woman drew a sharp exhale from across the room. There was no ambiguity. There was no alternative interpretation. There was no other side to consider. When the footage ended, the room was silent for a long moment. A senior prosecutor, a man who had spent 2 decades handling civil rights cases, finally spoke. "That," he said quietly, "is the clearest case of civil rights violation I've seen in 20 years. The FBI and DOJ didn't just investigate the incident, they investigated the man. Within 48 hours, a team of federal agents had pulled every complaint ever filed against Officer Bryce Kessler. 31 complaints over 14 years. Each one had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Each one had been dismissed, filed away, forgotten. But now, under federal scrutiny, the patterns that had been ignored for over a decade became impossible to deny. 14 of Kessler's prior victims agreed to be re-interviewed. Every single one was Black or Latino. Their stories were nearly identical, stopped for no reason, accused of fitting a description. Demands for identification, followed by dismissive responses when credentials were provided, threats of arrest, physical intimidation, in 4 cases, handcuffs, in 2 cases, injuries that required medical attention. None of them had been charged with any crime. None of them had done anything wrong. Investigators subpoenaed internal emails from the airport police department. What they found was damning. Supervisors had known about Kessler's behavior for years. Complaints had been flagged, discussed in meetings, and deliberately minimized. One email from a former captain, dated 3 years earlier, was particularly devastating. It read, "Kessler's aggressive, but he gets results. The complaints are from the usual suspects. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." The usual suspects. The phrase echoed through the federal investigation like a confession. The cover-up wasn't one rogue officer protecting himself. It was institutional. Supervisors had enabled Kessler. Internal affairs had cleared him. The system had protected him at every turn, allowing him to target minorities for 14 years without consequence. Until now. The president's statement was released at 4 p.m. Eastern, less than 10 hours after the assault. It was brief, direct, and left no room for interpretation. The assault on Judge Vivian Hartwell is an affront to the rule of law and to the principles this nation was founded upon. A sitting federal judge was attacked by those sworn to protect the public. This administration will ensure full accountability for everyone involved. 2. Within the hour, the Attorney General held a press conference on the steps of the Department of Justice. Her words were measured but firm. The DOJ has opened a federal civil rights investigation into the Reagan National Airport Police Department. We will examine not only the actions of the officers involved in this incident, but the institutional failures that allowed a pattern of discriminatory enforcement to persist for over a decade. The Secretary of Homeland Security, whose department coordinated with airport police agencies nationwide, issued a directive demanding an immediate review of use-of-force policies and complaint handling procedures at every airport police department in the country. What happened at Reagan National cannot be treated as an isolated incident, the statement read. We must examine whether similar failures exist elsewhere. At the daily White House press briefing, reporters fired questions about the administration's response. The press secretary stood at the podium, her expression grave. "Let me be clear," she said. "An attack on a federal judge is an attack on the judiciary itself. It is an attack on the constitutional separation of powers. It is an attack on the foundation of our democracy. There will be accountability, there will be consequences, and this administration will not rest until justice is served." Behind closed doors, the message was even more direct. Careers would end, prosecutions would follow, no one would be protected. The consequences came faster than anyone at Reagan National had ever seen. Officer Bryce Kessler was arrested 3 days after the incident. Federal agents took him into custody at his home at 6 a.m., placing him in handcuffs in his own driveway while neighbors watched from their windows. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault of a federal official, and filing a false police report. His law enforcement certification was revoked before the end of the week. At his arraignment, prosecutors argued that Kessler was a flight risk and a danger to the community. They cited his history of violence, his pattern of targeting minorities, and the severity of the charges. The judge agreed. Bail was denied. Bryce Kessler, who had spent 16 years believing he was untouchable, was led out of the courtroom in shackles. Officer Danny Stokes was arrested the same morning. He was charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights and failure to intervene during the commission of a federal crime. His 5 years of following Kessler's lead without question had finally caught up with him. But the destruction didn't stop with the officers. 3 supervisors were fired within 2 weeks, including Captain Raymond Vogel, the man whose email had dismissed complaints against Kessler as coming from the usual suspects. The airport police chief, facing mounting pressure from federal investigators and the media, submitted his resignation. The Airport Authority Board, which had overseen the department for years without addressing systemic failures, was dissolved by order of the city council and reconstituted with entirely new members. The Department of Justice imposed a federal consent decree on the Reagan National Airport Police Department. Independent monitors would oversee all operations. New use-of-force policies were mandated. Body camera compliance would be reviewed weekly. Complaint handling procedures were completely restructured. 16 years of institutional protection had collapsed in less than a month. The federal trial of Bryce Kessler began on a cold Monday morning in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. The gallery included civil rights attorneys, law enforcement officials, and members of Congress who had traveled to witness the proceedings. On the first day, prosecutors played the body camera footage. The courtroom was silent as Kessler's own camera showed him approaching Judge Hartwell. They watched him dismiss her credentials. They heard him say, "People like you, and I don't care if you're the Queen of England." They watched him grab her arm and drive her face into the tile. They heard Stokes shout, "Stop resisting," at a motionless woman. Several jurors looked away. One wiped her eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, 14 prior victims took the stand. One by one, they described encounters that mirrored what had happened to Judge Hartwell. The stops without cause, the fabricated justifications, the threats, the humiliation, a pattern stretching back over a decade, exposed in devastating detail. Judge Vivian Hartwell testified on the 8th day. She wore a dark suit and simple glasses to replace the ones that had shattered on the terminal floor. Her voice was calm, precise, and unwavering. She recounted every moment of the assault, every word Kessler had spoken, every second she had spent lying on the cold tile with a knee in her back and blood running down her face. Kessler's defense was simple. He had followed protocol and felt threatened by Hartwell's demeanor. The video evidence destroyed that argument before it could gain traction. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Bryce Kessler was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Danny Stokes, who had cooperated with investigators, received 3 years. The supervisors who had enabled Kessler's behavior for over a decade faced their own trials in the months that followed. 6 weeks after her face hit the terminal floor at Reagan National Airport, Judge Vivian Hartwell returned to the bench. The gash above her eyebrow had healed into a thin scar that she made no effort to hide. She walked into her courtroom in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals with the same quiet authority she had carried through that terminal on the morning everything changed. Her clerk stood as she entered. The attorneys present fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then she took her seat and called the first case. The judicial conference in Chicago had been postponed, but not canceled. 3 weeks after her return to the bench, Judge Hartwell delivered her keynote address via video link from her chambers. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She spoke about accountability, about the justice system's obligation to protect everyone equally, regardless of who they are or what they look like, about the courage of the witnesses who had raised their phones and refused to look away, about the body cameras that had captured the truth when lies might have prevailed. Justice is not a guarantee, she said. It is a responsibility. It requires vigilance. It requires courage. And it requires all of us citizens, officers, judges to hold ourselves and each other accountable. She did not seek the spotlight. She gave no interviews. She declined book deals and speaking offers that would have made her wealthy. But her case became a landmark nonetheless. Body camera footage, civilian recordings, and institutional accountability had combined to deliver something rare: actual consequences. The civil settlement was reached 4 months after the incident. The Reagan National Airport Authority agreed to pay $4.2 million to Judge Hartwell, along with a formal public apology and a commitment to implement every reform demanded by the federal consent decree. In Congress, a bipartisan group of legislators introduced the Hartwell Reform Act, mandating federal oversight of airport police departments, standardized use of force policies, and independent review of all complaints alleging racial profiling or discrimination. The bill passed the House within 6 months. In her chambers, Judge Hartwell kept one item from the incident: her shattered glasses, the frames bent and one lens missing, were mounted in a simple black frame on her desk. Visitors sometimes asked about them. She always gave the same answer. A reminder, she would say, that justice, though sometimes broken, can be repaired. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
May I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?
Excuse me?
Your badge number. I'm entitled
I need backup
to
at pre-check lane 3. Non-compliant passenger, possibly hostile.
I'm not hostile.
You people always have questions. Always got something to say. Always making demands.
At 7:42 a.m., Inside Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a white police officer approached a black woman standing in the TSA pre-check line and told her she was in the wrong place. The woman was wearing a tailored navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and holding credentials that identified her as a federal judge. Her name was Monique Johnson, 54 years old, appointed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support. She had served on the federal bench for 9 years. The officer who stopped her, Darren Kovacs, 41, had spent 16 years with the Charlotte Airport Police Department. He had decided in the span of a single glance that she didn't belong, not in that line, not in that terminal, not anywhere near the expedited boarding lanes reserved for verified travelers. He didn't check her credentials, he didn't scan her identification, he looked at her skin color and made his judgment. What happened in the next 11 minutes was captured by 7 different security cameras positioned throughout the terminal concourse. Every word, every shove, every moment of escalation that would later be played in a federal courtroom, broadcast across national news, and viewed more than 50 million times online. What happened in those 11 minutes would trigger an FBI investigation, end multiple careers, send 3 officers to federal prison, and result in one of the largest civil rights settlements in airport police history. Officer Darren Kovacs had been with the Charlotte Airport Police Department since he was 25 years old. In that time, he had accumulated 31 formal complaints from travelers. 28 of those complaints involved black passengers. He had been accused of racial profiling, excessive force, unlawful detention, and verbal abuse more times than most officers receive complaints in an entire career. Not once had he faced a disciplinary hearing. Not once had he been suspended. Not once had any supervisor sat him down and told him his behavior was unacceptable. Instead, he had been promoted twice. Among his colleagues, Kovacs had earned a nickname. They called him the Gatekeeper. It wasn't a compliment from those who understood what it meant. He had made a habit of stationing himself near pre-check and priority boarding lanes, targeting black travelers for additional screening and questioning. He seemed to take personal satisfaction in making them prove they belonged. A black airline pilot in full uniform had been forced to produce 6 forms of identification before Kovacs would let him pass. A congressional aide traveling with a U.S. senator had been detained for 2 hours based on what Kovacs called suspicious behavior. She had been reading a book while waiting in line. Every complaint filed against him landed on the desk of Lieutenant Frank Ingram, his direct supervisor, and every complaint was dismissed. Insufficient evidence, conflicting accounts, no video available. The excuses varied, but the outcome never did. Kovacs walked away clean every single time, learning with each complaint that there would never be consequences for the way he treated people who looked like Monique Johnson. Judge Monique Johnson had spent her entire adult life in service to the law. She graduated from Harvard Law School at the top of her class, turned down offers from corporate firms paying 6 figures, and joined the U.S. Attorney's Office because she believed in justice. For 22 years, she prosecuted federal cases, organized crime, public corruption, civil rights violations. She sent dirty cops to prison. She dismantled trafficking rings. She stood in front of juries and spoke for victims who had no other voice. When the president nominated her to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Senate confirmed her 94-6. Republicans praised her fairness. Democrats praised her record. Legal scholars called her one of the most qualified judicial appointments in a generation. From the bench, she had issued landmark rulings on voting rights, police accountability, and equal protection under the law. Her opinions were cited in law school classrooms across the country. That morning, she was traveling to Washington, D.C. for an emergency hearing at the Supreme Court. A case involving federal sentencing guidelines required her presence, and she had booked the earliest flight out of Charlotte to make the 10 a.m. session. In her briefcase, she carried her federal judicial identification, her State Department travel clearance, and documentation granting her diplomatic courtesies at all U.S. ports of entry. She had credentials that could get her into secure facilities most Americans didn't know existed. She had chosen to travel without her usual security detail. It was a simple domestic flight, a routine trip she had made dozens of times before. She never imagined she would need protection inside an American airport. Kovacs stepped directly into Judge Johnson's path as she approached the pre-check entrance. His stance was wide, his hand resting on his belt, his expression already hostile. "Ma'am, this line is for verified travelers only," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Regular screening is over there." Judge Johnson stopped. She had dealt with men like this before in courtrooms, in depositions, in federal facilities where defendants thought intimidation would work on her. It never did. She reached into her briefcase calmly and produced her credentials. "I'm a federal judge," she said, holding out her judicial identification and pre-check documentation. "These are my credentials." Kovacs barely glanced at them. He didn't take the ID. He didn't scan the barcode. He didn't examine the holographic seal or the photograph that clearly matched the woman standing before him. He looked at her face, then back at the credentials, and shook his head. "These are probably fake," he said. "You're going to need additional screening." Behind her, white travelers passed through the line without a second glance. A businessman in a rumpled suit, a woman with 2 children pulling roller bags, an elderly couple moving slowly toward the scanners. None of them were stopped. None of them were questioned. Kovacs' partner, Officer Neil Stanton, 29, stood a few feet away watching the interaction. He said nothing, did nothing. The security cameras recorded everything, including the fact that Kovacs never once scanned or verified her credentials before deciding she didn't belong. Kovacs pointed toward a roped-off area beside the security checkpoint. "Step out of line," he said. "Now." Judge Johnson complied. She stepped to the side without argument, without raising her voice, without giving him any reason to escalate. But before moving further, she asked a simple question. "May I have your badge number and the name of your supervisor?" Kovacs' expression darkened. He reached for his radio. "I need backup at pre-check lane 3. I've got a non-compliant passenger." Judge Johnson's voice remained steady. "I'm not being non-compliant. I'm asking for your identification, as is my right." Kovacs ignored her. He stepped closer, crowding her space, and pointed at the wall beside the screening area. "Hands on the wall. You're getting a pat-down." "On what grounds?" she asked. That was when he grabbed her. His hand closed around her upper arm with force that would leave bruises visible for weeks. He yanked her toward the wall and shoved her forward. Her briefcase slipped from her grip and hit the floor, clasps popping open, legal documents scattering across the tile. Travelers nearby gasped. Several pulled out phones and began recording. Kovacs leaned in close, his voice loud enough for the cameras to capture every word. "You people always think you're above the law." Judge Johnson turned her head slightly, her cheek pressed near the wall, her voice calm despite the grip on her arm. "Officer, I am the law. I'm a federal judge on the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals." Kovacs laughed. The sound was cruel, dismissive, dripping with contempt. "Sure you are," he said. "And I'm the Pope." Kovacs pulled his handcuffs from his belt. "You're being detained for disorderly conduct." Judge Johnson kept her hands visible, her posture compliant. "What specific conduct?" "I've followed every instruction. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't resisted." Kovacs didn't answer with words. He grabbed her right wrist and wrenched it behind her back with a violent twist. The motion was fast, brutal, and completely unnecessary. Judge Johnson cried out as her shoulder joint separated partially from its socket. The pain shot through her arm and into her chest. Before she could speak, Kovacs slammed her forward onto the metal screening table. Her face struck the surface hard. Her glasses shattered on impact, a shard slicing into her cheek just below her left eye. Blood began running down her face immediately, bright red against the stainless steel surface, visible on every camera recording the scene. Kovacs forced her down and planted his knee into her upper back, pressing his full weight onto a 54-year-old woman with a dislocated shoulder and a bleeding face wound. "I'm not resisting," Judge Johnson said through clenched teeth. "You're injuring me. I need medical attention." Kovacs leaned down closer. "Should have thought about that before you got uppity." His partner, Officer Stanton finally stepped forward. "Darren, maybe we should Kovacs cut him off without looking back." "Shut up, Neil. I know how to handle these people." The cameras recorded everything: the blood on the table, the knee on her back, the words he chose, every second of it documented and preserved. A man in a gray suit pushed through the gathering crowd. He was 62 years old, tall, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of authority. His name was Colonel Samuel Okonjo, retired, former Judge Advocate General Attorney for the United States Army. He had prosecuted military crimes for 30 years. He knew excessive force when he saw it. "Officer, stop what you're doing immediately," Colonel Okonjo said, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. "That woman is injured and compliant. You have no legal basis for this level of force." Kovacs looked up, his knee still pressing into Judge Johnson's back. "Sir, step back, or you'll be arrested for interference with a police officer." Colonel Okonjo didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone already recording and dialed 911. His voice was calm, practiced, the voice of a man who had testified in hundreds of courtrooms. "I need to report an assault in progress at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, TSA pre-check area. The assault is being committed by an airport police officer against a restrained civilian. The victim is bleeding and requesting medical attention. Send emergency services immediately." Kovacs's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, a woman in a TSA supervisor uniform appeared. Denise Carrington had heard the commotion from across the checkpoint and pushed through the crowd. She took one look at the scene, the blood, the scattered documents, the federal judicial ID lying open on the floor, and her face went pale. "Officer," she said slowly, reaching for her radio, "do you know who this woman is?" Kovacs sneered. "I don't care if she's the Queen of England." Airport Police Chief Bernard Foley arrived 4 minutes later, slightly out of breath, his uniform still crisp, but his expression already tight with concern. He had received 3 calls in rapid succession, one from TSA, one from Airport Authority, and one from a city official who had seen a live video already circulating online. Denise Carrington intercepted him before he reached the scene. She leaned close and whispered a name. Chief Foley's face changed instantly. The color drained. His jaw went slack. He strode toward Kovacs with barely controlled urgency. "Remove the handcuffs," Foley said quietly. "Right now." Kovacs looked up, confused. "Chief, she was non-compliant. I have witnesses." "She. That's a federal appellate judge, you idiot." Foley's voice was low but sharp as a blade. "She sits on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. She was confirmed by the United States Senate. Remove the cuffs now." Kovacs' hands froze. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He unlocked the handcuffs and stepped back. Judge Johnson slowly pushed herself upright, cradling her injured arm against her chest. Blood still dripped from the cut beneath her eye. Chief Foley softened his tone, attempting damage control. "Your Honor, let's get you somewhere private. Medical attention, whatever you need. I'm sure we can handle this internally without—" Judge Johnson turned to face him. Her voice was steady despite the pain. "Chief, I've spent 22 years prosecuting cover-ups. I know exactly what you're attempting right now." She glanced at the cameras overhead, then back at Foley. "And you're doing it on camera." Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Judge Johnson sitting on a metal bench, her right arm hanging at an unnatural angle, blood drying on her cheek and jaw. The cut beneath her eye required 6 stitches. Her shoulder was confirmed as partially dislocated and would need to be reset at the hospital. She refused to leave. "I'm not going anywhere until I speak with the FBI," she said. The paramedics exchanged glances but didn't argue. The Charlotte FBI field office received a call at 8:14 a.m. 2 special agents were dispatched immediately and arrived at the terminal within 20 minutes. While they were en route, Chief Foley made another attempt at containment. He approached Colonel Okonjo and the other witnesses who had recorded the incident on their phones. "We're going to need to collect those devices as part of our investigation," Foley said. Colonel Okonjo didn't blink. Confiscating witness recordings without a warrant is a federal offense, Chief. I'd advise you to step back. Foley retreated. From the back of the ambulance, Judge Johnson made a single phone call to the Chief Justice's office in Washington. She explained briefly what had happened. The emergency hearing she was scheduled to attend would have to be delayed. By 9 a.m., news alerts began appearing on phones across the country. Federal judge assaulted at Charlotte Airport. Appellate court judge bloodied by police. Kovacs was placed on administrative leave that morning, but witnesses later reported seeing him in the airport police break room less than an hour later, laughing with fellow officers. His initial incident report, filed at 10:47 a.m., claimed that Judge Johnson had become combative and refused lawful orders. The FBI subpoenaed Charlotte Douglas International Airport's security footage before noon. What they received was comprehensive and devastating. 7 different cameras had captured the incident from multiple angles. The footage showed Judge Johnson standing calmly in the pre-check line. It showed Kovacs approaching her unprompted. It showed her presenting credentials that he never examined. It showed her complying with every instruction, stepping out of line without protest, keeping her hands visible at all times. It showed Kovacs grabbing her arm, slamming her against the wall, throwing her onto the screening table, and driving his knee into her back while she bled onto the metal surface. The audio was equally damning. Every word Kovacs had spoken was captured with perfect clarity. "You people always think you're above the law. Should have thought about that before you got uppity. I know how to handle these people." His incident report was contradicted on every single point. Witness phone videos had already begun circulating online. Within 48 hours, the footage had been viewed more than 47 million times across multiple platforms. Comment sections filled with outrage. News networks played the clips on loop, but the most damaging evidence came from Kovacs's own body camera. He had reported that it malfunctioned during the incident, that no footage existed. FBI technicians recovered the recording from the department's cloud backup server. It showed Kovacs spotting Judge Johnson in line, turning to Officer Stanton and saying with a smirk, "Watch me deal with this one." Within 1 week, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the Charlotte Airport Police Department. What they found went far beyond a single officer. FBI interviews with current and former employees revealed a culture of institutional racism that had been allowed to flourish for years. Kovacs, it turned out, had made a game of it. He and a small group of officers had an informal betting pool. They wagered on how many minority travelers each of them could redirect away from pre-check lanes during a single shift. The officer with the highest count at the end of the week collected the pot. Investigators recovered emails from Lieutenant Frank Ingram's department account showing that he was not only aware of the betting pool, he had participated in it, he had placed bets, he had collected winnings. He had laughed at jokes about which officers were leading the league. The 31 complaints previously filed against Kovacs were pulled from the archives and re-examined. This time, investigators actually contacted the complainants. 19 former victims came forward publicly. A black cardiothoracic surgeon had been detained for 4 hours in 2019 while traveling to a medical conference. A black woman married to a Fortune 500 CEO had been taken to a private room and strip-searched based on what Kovacs called reasonable suspicion. A black Olympic athlete had missed his flight to a qualifying event after Kovacs selected him for random additional screening. Internal Affairs had dismissed every single complaint without conducting substantive investigations. The entire airport police command structure, from sergeants to the chief himself, was implicated in a systemic cover-up that had protected Kovacs for 16 years. A federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after the assault. The indictments came down on a Thursday morning. Officer Darren Kovacs was charged with assault under color of law pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, filing false federal reports, and obstruction of justice. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. Lieutenant Frank Ingram was indicted as a co-conspirator. The charges against him included conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, and failure to intervene in the commission of a federal crime. He had known what Kovacs was doing for years. He had protected him. He had participated in the betting pool that treated racial profiling as sport. Chief Bernard Foley was indicted separately for obstruction of justice and attempted cover-up. His actions at the scene, attempting to confiscate witness phones, offering to handle this internally, pressuring Judge Johnson not to escalate, were all captured on camera and constituted clear evidence of criminal intent. Officer Neil Stanton was granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony. He sat before investigators and described what everyone in the department had known for years. "We all knew what Kovacs did," Stanton said. "We were told to look the other way. Anyone who complained got bad assignments, overnight shifts, paperwork duty, so nobody complained. State charges followed. Kovacs was additionally charged with assault causing bodily injury and official oppression. He was denied bail after prosecutors presented evidence that he had attempted to contact and intimidate witnesses through intermediaries. The federal trial of Darren Kovacs lasted 4 weeks. Every day, the courtroom filled with spectators, journalists, and civil rights advocates who had traveled from across the country to witness the proceedings. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The security footage was played repeatedly from every available angle. Jurors watched in visible disgust as Kovacs grabbed Judge Johnson's arm, slammed her onto the screening table, and pressed his knee into her back while she bled. Several jurors looked away. One wiped tears from her eyes. Kovacs took the stand in his own defense. His attorney had advised against it, but Kovacs insisted. He told the jury he was just following training and that Judge Johnson had presented a suspicious profile that warranted additional screening. The cross-examination destroyed him. Prosecutors produced the department's official training materials, which explicitly prohibited the level of force Kovacs had used. They showed his text messages to fellow officers jokes about going on airport safari and celebrating when he caught another one. They played his body camera footage showing him smirking and saying, "Watch me deal with this one," before approaching a woman who had done nothing wrong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Kovacs was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and received a lifetime ban from law enforcement in any capacity. Lieutenant Frank Ingram received 4 years, his cooperation during the investigation considered as a mitigating factor. Chief Bernard Foley received 3 years and was ordered to forfeit his pension. Officer Neil Stanton received probation, was terminated from the force, and was required to testify in all subsequent civil proceedings. 3 months after the criminal convictions, Judge Monique Johnson filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. The defendants named in the complaint included Darren Kovacs, Frank Ingram, Bernard Foley, the City of Charlotte, and the Charlotte Airport Authority. The lawsuit alleged systemic discrimination, failure to train, failure to supervise, and deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of minority travelers. Discovery revealed the full scope of the department's failures. Over the previous 10 years, 847 complaints had been filed against Charlotte Airport police officers. 91% of those complaints involved minority travelers. Not a single complaint had resulted in a sustained finding against any officer. Expert witnesses testified that such a statistical pattern was impossible without systemic discrimination embedded in departmental policy and practice. The city's attorneys attempted to settle. They offered $5 million to make the case go away quietly. Judge Johnson refused. She demanded full accountability policy changes, independent oversight, a public admission of wrongdoing, and the creation of a civilian review board with real authority. The city refused her terms. The trial proceeded. After 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and expert analysis, the jury returned its verdict. They awarded $12.4 million in compensatory damages for Judge Johnson's physical injuries, emotional distress, and harm to her professional reputation. They added $8.7 million in punitive damages against the individual officers. The total $21.1 million was the largest civil rights verdict against an airport police department in American history. In the months that followed, 19 other victims filed their own lawsuits. Their settlements totaled an additional $14 million. Judge Monique Johnson returned to the bench 3 months after the assault. Her shoulder had healed, though she would carry a faint scar beneath her left eye for the rest of her life. Her first case back was a civil rights matter involving police misconduct, a fact that did not escape the notice of legal observers watching her courtroom. She used a significant portion of her settlement funds to establish the Johnson Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing free legal representation to victims of discrimination who could not afford attorneys. Within its first year, the initiative took on more than 200 cases nationwide. The Charlotte Airport Police Department was disbanded entirely. The city rebuilt the force from the ground up with new leadership, new hiring standards, and new accountability structures. Mandatory bias training became required for all officers. A civilian oversight board was created with the power to investigate complaints independently. Every allegation of misconduct would now be reviewed by an outside body with no ties to the department. A federal consent decree required 10 years of Department of Justice monitoring to ensure compliance. Darren Kovacs served his sentence at a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. He never apologized. He filed 3 appeals, all of which were denied. In a prison interview conducted 2 years into his sentence, he showed no remorse. "I was doing my job," he said. "She should have just complied." Judge Johnson responded in an interview of her own. "I did comply," she said. "I complied with every request while being assaulted." Compliance isn't the issue. The issue is that some officers see black skin and see a threat, regardless of credentials, accomplishments, or behavior. My robe didn't protect me. My credentials didn't protect me. The only thing that protected me was that camera. 2 years after the incident, Judge Johnson walked through Charlotte Douglas International Airport on her way to another hearing in Washington. Her head was high. Her stride was steady. TSA agents nodded respectfully as she passed. Officer Darren Kovacs thought he could assault a black woman and face no consequences. He forgot that the cameras were watching. He forgot that truth has a way of surfacing. And he forgot that sometimes the person you target has spent her entire career ensuring that justice prevails even when it's delayed. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, if you're someone who lies awake at 2 or 3 a.m., mind racing, unable to shut off, I know how frustrating that is. You're exhausted, but your brain just won't stop. And the worst part? The less you sleep, the worse it gets. Your energy crashes, your mood suffers, everything feels harder than it should. I struggled with this for years. Tried melatonin, white noise, warm milk, nothing worked long term. Then I found something called the 30-Day Uninterrupted Sleep Reset. It's a science-based program, no pills, no medication, that actually retrains your brain to sleep through the night, 7 to 8 hours, uninterrupted. Over 30 days, it rewires your sleep system. And once you're done, you keep the results, there's a maintenance plan, so you don't slip back. Look, if you've tried everything and nothing sticks, this is different. Check the link in the description. Seriously, try it. And I'll catch you in the next story.
Stand up, now! I need identification and proof that uniform is yours.
Officer, I am Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Garrison, United States Navy. What crime am I suspected of?
Don't argue with me. Anyone can buy that costume. Hands visible. Get up.
My military ID.
Officer Dustin Hargrove thought he was protecting a school. Anonymous tip. Suspicious black male in military clothing near Ridgemont High School. Possibly armed. Possibly impersonating military personnel. In his mind, responding aggressively was standard protocol. He had profiled dozens of people based on nothing more than how they looked. Never questioned, never challenged. But when he rolled up to a graduation ceremony with over 2,000 people in attendance, local news cameras filming, and the school district's own live stream broadcasting to hundreds of families watching from home, and targeted the only black man in a military uniform, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. The man he targeted was a decorated Navy SEAL with 24 years of active service. And when Hargrove destroyed the proudest moment of that man's life in front of his daughter, his elderly mother, and an entire community, he set in motion a chain of events that would end in 18 years of federal prison. Hargrove had been with the Ridgemont Police Department for 16 years. Beneath his reputation for proactive policing lay 11 civilian complaints over 9 years, each alleging racial profiling. Every complaint dismissed. The call came in at 1:47 p.m. on a Saturday in late May. Anonymous caller, suspicious black man in military clothing, possibly armed. No name, no specifics, no evidence. Hargrove didn't verify anything. He assembled 3 officers, Sergeant Lloyd Tatum, Officer Breanne Kendrick, and Officer Sam Novak. All 4 activated body cameras at 2:03 p.m. What Hargrove didn't know was that 2 district live stream cameras, a Channel 4 news crew, and dozens of parent phones were already recording. Every angle covered, every sound captured. Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Nate Garrison sat in the front row, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt completely at peace. He was 44 years old. 24 years of active service with the United States Navy, Navy SEAL, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, multiple classified deployments to places whose names would never appear in any newspaper. He had been shot at in 6 countries, carried wounded teammates through hostile territory, made decisions under fire that most people couldn't comprehend. And none of it compared to the pride swelling in his chest as he watched his daughter approach that podium. He wore his Navy dress white uniform, pressed to perfection. His medals were pinned in precise regulation order across his left chest, catching the afternoon sunlight. His SEAL trident, the gold insignia that only the most elite warriors in the American military earned the right to wear, gleamed above the ribbons. His name stitched in black letters, Garrison. He put them on today because his daughter asked him to. "Daddy, wear your uniform. I want everyone to see how proud I am of you." So he did. Beside him sat his mother, Barbara Garrison, 71, a retired school teacher, wearing a lavender dress and a corsage Amara had pinned to her chest that morning. On his other side, his son Elijah, 14, a hand-drawn sign on his lap reading, "That's my sister," in red and blue marker, Amara Garrison, 18 years old, valedictorian, 4.3 gigapascals, accepted to 3 Ivy League schools. She had dedicated her entire speech to her father, the man who missed birthdays in war zones so other families could be safe. She practiced it 40 times. She knew every word. And when she reached the podium, she found him in the front row in his gleaming whites and smiled. This was the day he promised he'd never miss. Amara leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, carrying across the field through the PA system. The first words of her valedictorian speech were about her father. "There's a man in the front row wearing a white uniform covered in medals he never talks about. He missed my 7th birthday because he was in a country I'm still not allowed to know the name of. He missed my 10th because he was recovering from wounds he never showed me. But he never missed telling me he loved me. Not once." She looked directly at Nate. He looked back, his eyes filling, his jaw tight with emotion. Barbara gripped his arm. Elijah held up his sign. The crowd was silent, emotional, 2,000 people hanging on every word. The live stream cameras captured the moment in wide angle. The Channel 4 crew zoomed in on Amara's face. Parents held phones steady, recording. And then, from the back of the graduation field, 4 officers appeared. Hargrove led, walking with purpose, his body camera recording his view of the rows ahead. Tatum, Kendrick, and Novak flanked behind him, their cameras adding 3 more angles. They walked directly down the center aisle, past hundreds of white families seated in folding chairs, past grandparents and toddlers and proud parents, straight toward the front row, straight toward the only black man in a military uniform. Hargrove stepped in front of Nate, blocking his view of the stage. His body camera recorded Nate's face, looking up. The live stream captured the officers from behind, 4 dark uniforms standing over a man in white. The news camera caught it in profile. Dozens of phones swiveled, and at the podium, mid-sentence, Amara stuttered. Her voice caught. The microphone carried her silence to every corner of the field. "Stand up," Hargrove said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. His body camera recorded Nate's face from above, calm, controlled, the face of a man trained to remain composed under conditions that would break most people. "I need identification and proof that this uniform belongs to you." The accusation hung in the air. Impersonating military personnel, a federal crime under the Stolen Valor Act. The implication captured on 4 body cameras, 2 live stream feeds, the news camera, and every phone pointed in their direction. Nate didn't stand. He spoke quietly, his voice measured, aware that his daughter was watching from the stage, his mother was trembling beside him, and 2,000 people were staring. "Officer, my name is Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Garrison, United States Navy." He gestured to his chest, his medals, his trident. "This is my uniform. My name is stitched right here. My military ID is in my jacket pocket. What crime am I suspected of committing?" Hargrove's camera recorded his own dismissive gesture, waving away the medals, the trident, the name tape. 24 years of service dismissed with a flick of his wrist. Anyone can buy that stuff online. I need real identification. Now. Nate's jaw tightened. The movement captured on Kendrick's camera from the side. "You haven't told me what crime I'm suspected of. Under the 4th Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion to—" "I'm not going to ask again," Hargrove interrupted. The threat was unmistakable. And then, through the PA system, carried across the entire field and picked up by every recording device present, Amara's voice cracked. "Dad?" 2,000 people heard it. The live stream broadcast it to hundreds of homes. Nate looked at his daughter, his eyes glistening. He mouthed the words, "Keep going, baby. I'm okay." He was not okay. "Step out of the row. Now." Hargrove's body camera recorded his own hand gesturing toward the aisle. Nate looked at his mother, looked at his son, then stood slowly, his dress whites rising above the seated crowd like a beacon. He squeezed past families in folding chairs, excusing himself quietly, his composure holding even as officers flanked him on both sides, hands resting on their weapons. Tatum's camera captured the families shrinking back as the officers passed. Kendrick's camera recorded their faces, confusion, fear, anger. Barbara grabbed Nate's arm as he stepped into the aisle, her fingers gripping his sleeve, tears streaming down her face. "Please, he didn't do anything. Please, stop this." Novak reached down and pushed her hand away, the gesture captured on his own body camera and on at least 4 phones from surrounding rows. A 71-year-old woman's hand brushed off her son's arm like she was an obstruction. Elijah shot to his feet, his sign crumpling in his fist, his face contorted with rage. The boy stepped toward Novak and Nate turned. His voice was calm, absolute, the voice of a man who had commanded operators in combat. "Sit down, son. Take care of your grandmother." Elijah stopped. His chest heaving, he sat. The school principal, Dr. Diane Ashford, rushed from the side of the stage, her heels sinking into the grass. "Officers, this man is an invited guest. He's a parent. He's a decorated military veteran. Please, you need to stop this." Hargrove ignored her. He positioned Nate on the open grass beside the ceremony, in full view of the stage, the crowd, and every camera. Then he patted him down, his hands running over the dress whites, pressing against the metal ribbons, displacing the bronze stars, pushing the trident crooked. Amara stood frozen at the podium, tears streaming down her face, watching her father being frisked at her graduation. The live stream carried every second to hundreds of homes. Hargrove reached into Nate's jacket pocket and pulled out a military identification card. Department of Defense, photo, name, rank, Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. He stared at it. His body camera recorded his own hands holding the card, the photo matching the man standing in front of him, the name matching the letters stitched on the uniform. Kendrick's camera captured Hargrove's expression, the flicker of doubt, The moment where a reasonable officer would have stopped, apologized, and walked away. Hargrove was not a reasonable officer. "This could be forged," he said. "We're taking you in for identity verification." Nate's voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it was captured on every microphone present. A man trained in SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, using every ounce of that discipline to keep himself from breaking. "Officer, you're holding my Department of Defense identification. My name is on my uniform. My medals are verified. You have no probable cause. This is an unlawful arrest under the Fourth Amendment, and I am telling you clearly, for the record, that I do not consent." Hargrove pulled out his handcuffs. The metallic click echoed across the silent field, picked up by body cameras, the live stream, the news crew, and dozens of phones. He grabbed Nate's wrists and cuffed them behind his back. The metal bit into his skin. The crowd saw a decorated Navy SEAL in dress whites, hands bound behind him, standing on the grass of his daughter's graduation. And then, through the PA system, broadcast across the entire field and into hundreds of living rooms, Amara screamed, "Daddy!" The sound tore through the ceremony. Students burst into tears. Parents surged to their feet, shouting. Barbara collapsed against Elijah, sobbing. Nate was walked across the entire graduation field in handcuffs, his white uniform blazing in the afternoon sun, his medals catching light with every step. The longest walk of his life, recorded from at least 9 different angles. Amara's knees buckled. The live stream cameras captured her hands gripping the podium, her fingers white, her body folding as 2 teachers rushed from the side of the stage to catch her. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving in rapid, shallow gasps, her face contorted in a way that no 18-year-old should ever have to experience at her own graduation. The microphone was still live. The PA system carried the sound of her sobbing across the entire field, into every phone recording, into every live stream feed, into hundreds of living rooms where families sat watching in horror. Her valedictorian speech, months of preparation, 40 rehearsals, a love letter to the father who sacrificed everything, was never finished. The ceremony collapsed. Students in caps and gowns were crying in their seats. Parents were on their feet, some screaming at the officers retreating across the parking lot, others with phones pressed to their ears calling news stations, demanding answers. In the front row, Barbara Garrison was having a panic episode, her breathing ragged, her hands shaking uncontrollably, her lavender dress darkened with tears. Elijah held her, 14 years old, his arms wrapped around his grandmother, his face a mask of rage and helplessness that no child should ever have to wear. "Doctor." Ashford stood at the edge of the field, her phone pressed to her ear, shouting at the Ridgemont police chief. "You just arrested a Navy SEAL in front of 2,000 people at a graduation ceremony." His daughter collapsed on stage. "Do you understand what your officers have done?" But the damage was already beyond the field. The live stream footage had been screen recorded by hundreds of viewers the moment the handcuffs appeared. Uploads hit social media before Nate reached the patrol car. Within 90 minutes, 400,000 views. By nightfall, 6 million. The video had a title that wrote itself, and it was everywhere. At the Ridgemont precinct, Nate was booked for suspected identity fraud and failure to comply with a lawful order. Hargrove's body camera recorded the intake process, his perspective showing the booking desk, the fluorescent lights, the computer monitor. The booking officer, a man named Sergeant Victor Padilla, looked at the charges on the screen, then looked at Nate standing in handcuffs in his dress whites. His gaze moved to the SEAL trident on Nate's chest. Padilla was a Marine veteran, 12 years, 2 deployments to Fallujah. He recognized the trident immediately. Every service member would. His body camera captured his expression changing from routine processing to disbelief. "You arrested a SEAL?" he said, his voice quiet. "At his kid's graduation?" Hargrove's camera recorded his own defensive posture, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was non-cooperative, refused to provide adequate identification. Padilla ran Nate's information. His body camera captured the screen as results populated. Active duty, Senior Chief Petty Officer, 24 years of service, top secret security clearance, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Every single thing Nate had told Hargrove in that field confirmed in under 3 minutes. He's exactly who he said he was, Padilla said flatly. His camera captured him turning to face Hargrove. Every word of it. Hargrove doubled down. He was non-cooperative and created a public disturbance. Padilla's camera recorded the long silence that followed. The body camera footage from the field showed the opposite. Nate never raised his voice, never resisted, never made a single aggressive movement. The only disturbance was created by 4 officers who interrupted a graduation ceremony to arrest an innocent man. Nate was held for 4 hours. During that time, 17 miles away, Amara Garrison was admitted to the emergency room for a severe anxiety attack. Nate didn't know until he was released. No one told him. The story didn't break. It detonated. By Sunday morning, the live stream footage had been downloaded, clipped, and reposted across every major platform. 9+ angles of an American hero in dress whites being handcuffed at his daughter's graduation. Body camera footage obtained through public records requests within days. The Channel 4 segment aired nationally. Phone videos from parents filled timelines with shaking, furious commentary. It became the most documented racial profiling incident in modern history. Veterans organizations responded with fury. The Navy released a formal statement confirming Nate's service record and honoring his 24 years of distinguished duty. 3 sitting Congress members demanded a federal investigation. The NAACP issued a public condemnation. The ACLU offered immediate legal support. Military advocacy organizations lined up behind the Garrison family. Retired SEALs posted videos of their own tridents, captioning them with 3 words, "We know our own." The Ridgemont Police Department issued a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in their officers' judgment. It lasted 12 hours before being deleted. Investigators traced the anonymous call. It came from a woman named Judith Langford, a parent at the graduation seated 6 rows behind the Garrison family. When questioned, she told investigators she just felt uncomfortable seeing a black man in a military uniform. She said it didn't look right. She assumed no black man would actually be a Navy SEAL, so the uniform had to be fake. She made the call during the opening remarks, before Amara even reached the podium. She watched from her seat as officers arrested Nate. She never spoke up, never told them she had no evidence, never intervened as a father was dragged from his daughter's graduation based on her discomfort. She was never charged. Her phone call wasn't illegal, just racist, and it had destroyed a family's most important day. Attorney Vivian Okafor Price had spent 22 years fighting cases that other lawyers considered unwinnable. Former JAG officer, military law, civil rights litigation. She had argued before federal courts, deposed generals, and dismantled qualified immunity defenses that most attorneys wouldn't touch. When she watched the body camera footage for the first time, all 4 angles synchronized on her office monitors, she called Nate within the hour. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the United States District Court. Nathaniel Garrison versus City of Ridgemont, Officer Dustin Hargrove, Sergeant Lloyd Tatum, Officer Breanne Kendrick, and Officer Sam Novak. The complaint alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false arrest, unlawful seizure, racial profiling, retaliation for exercising constitutional rights, assault against Barbara Garrison, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of rights under color of law. But Okafor Price wasn't satisfied with a civil case. She pushed for criminal prosecution. The U.S. Attorney's Office reviewed the body camera footage alongside the live stream recordings, the news footage, and the phone videos. They saw what everyone saw. An officer targeting a man based on race, dismissing valid credentials, humiliating him publicly, arresting him without probable cause. Discovery cracked the department open. Hargrove's 11 prior complaints were entered into evidence. Internal affairs files showed each one dismissed with identical language, insufficient evidence to sustain. Internal emails between supervisors contained references to maintaining neighborhood character and managing community concerns about unfamiliar elements. Federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against Hargrove. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, 18 U.S.C. Section 241, false arrest, assault for the physical contact with Barbara Garrison. Tatum, Kendrick, and Novak were named as co-conspirators. The trial lasted 5 weeks. The trial was devastating. The courtroom was packed every single day. Civil rights advocates, veterans in uniform, members of the Ridgemont community, and national media who recognized this as a defining case about racial profiling in America. On the third day, prosecutors played the footage. All 9 angles synchronized on screens positioned around the courtroom, body cameras, the school live stream, the Channel 4 news feed, phone recordings from parents. The jury watched Hargrove walk past hundreds of white families and stop directly in front of the only black man in a military uniform. They watched him dismiss the medals, the trident, the name tape, the military ID. They watched him pat down the dress whites, pushing the bronze stars crooked. They watched Nate walk across the graduation field in handcuffs, his white uniform blazing in the sun, and they heard Amara's scream, "Daddy." Played through the courtroom speakers, the sound ripped through the room. 3 jurors broke down crying. Nate testified for 6 hours over 2 days. He described his service, his sacrifices, the promise he made to never miss his daughter's graduation. He described the discipline it took to remain calm while being humiliated in front of his family and his community. Amara testified. She described the nightmares, the panic attacks, the fact that she couldn't watch her own graduation video, that she never finished her speech, that the day she'd planned for years was destroyed in 17 minutes. Barbara testified about an officer pushing her hand off her own son's arm. Former SEALs testified about what the trident means, what it costs, what Nate sacrificed to earn it. Hargrove's qualified immunity defense was dismantled. He was told by the principal, by Nate, by the visible evidence of a legitimate uniform. He arrested anyway, guilty on all counts. 18 years, federal prison. The civil lawsuit settled during the damages phase, $22.4 million, the largest individual racial profiling settlement in United States history. Hargrove was taken into custody from the courtroom. Tatum and Kendrick each received 4-year federal sentences as co-conspirators. Novak, who had attempted to intervene during the arrest and been overruled by Hargrove, testified for the prosecution and received a suspended sentence. The Ridgemont Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, mandatory reforms, civilian oversight board with independent investigation authority, quarterly bias training with documented testing, body camera compliance protocols with severe penalties for non-compliance, demographic data collection on all stops and arrests with public reporting, an independent monitor appointed by the Department of Justice to review all complaints of racial profiling for a minimum of 5 years. Nate used a portion of his settlement to establish the Garrison Shield Foundation, providing free legal defense for veterans and active duty service members subjected to racial profiling and civil rights violations. He spoke at military installations across the country, sharing his story with service members who had experienced the same thing but never had the evidence to prove it. Amara eventually delivered her speech, not at graduation, not at Ridgemont High School. She delivered it before a congressional committee on racial profiling in law enforcement, reading the full text for the first time, her voice steady, broadcast live on C-SPAN to millions. She finished the words she never got to say. Then, she looked into the camera and added new ones. "My father served this country for 24 years. He bled for it. He nearly died for it. And on the proudest day of his life, he was treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. That has to mean something. It has to change something." She enrolled at Yale on a full scholarship. The case became required study material at Quantico, at police academies nationwide, and at the Naval Academy. Because a man who spent 24 years protecting his country shouldn't need protection from its police. But when he did, the truth was captured from 9 different angles, and justice, for once, was undeniable. If you believe that every American who serves deserves to be honored, not humiliated, that racial profiling has no place in law enforcement, and that the truth recorded on body cameras and live streams and phone videos can hold power accountable. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.